Here's something that will either inspire you or leave you scratching your head. A sitting U.S. president just publicly admitted he's worried about his eternal salvation and believes ending a devastating war might be his ticket to paradise. During a candid moment on Fox News that caught everyone off guard, President Donald Trump made a confession that reveals far more about his spiritual mindset than most politicians would ever dare share. But here's where it gets controversial. Should world leaders be making foreign policy decisions based on their personal hopes for the afterlife? On August 19th, while appearing on the morning show Fox Friends, Trump opened up about his recent diplomatic efforts involving the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia. What started as a routine discussion about international relations quickly turned into something much more personal and, frankly, unexpected. "I want to try and get to heaven, if possible," Trump declared with surprising vulnerability. "I'm hearing I'm not doing well. I am really at the bottom of the totem pole. But if I can get to heaven, this will be one of the reasons." This wasn't just political rhetoric or campaign talking points. This was a man genuinely concerned about his spiritual standing. And this is the part most people miss. Trump was specifically discussing his phone conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin, which took place after hosting Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and several European leaders at the White House the previous day. The context makes his heavenly aspirations even more intriguing. Trump emphasized his desire to stop the bloodshed, noting, "I want to end it. You know, we're not losing American lives. We're losing Russian and Ukrainian, mostly soldiers." He then connected this humanitarian goal directly to his spiritual concerns, suggesting that saving lives could improve his chances of eternal reward. But wait, what exactly are Trump's religious beliefs anyway? This question becomes crucial when understanding his motivation for peacemaking efforts. Trump's spiritual journey has been somewhat of a winding path. Originally, he identified himself as a Presbyterian, following a more traditional Protestant denomination known for its structured worship and theological frameworks. However, by 2020, something shifted in his religious perspective. He told Religion News Service that he had begun considering himself a non-denominational Christian instead. For those unfamiliar with religious terminology, this transition is actually quite significant. Non-denominational Christianity typically emphasizes a more personal, direct relationship with God, often rejecting formal church hierarchies and traditional denominational structures that Presbyterianism maintains. It's a choice that suggests Trump wanted a more individualized approach to his faith, which, honestly, seems pretty consistent with his overall personality. Interestingly enough, his wife Melania Trump follows a different religious path altogether. She made headlines back in 2017 when she met with the late Pope Francis and revealed her Catholic faith by asking the pontiff to bless her rosary beads. This creates a fascinating dynamic within the Trump household. A non-denominational Protestant husband married to a Catholic wife, each following their own spiritual traditions. Now here's where things get even more intriguing. Was Trump actually serious about this heaven comment? Or was he just making another one of his off-the-cuff remarks that we've all become accustomed to? White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt settled that question pretty definitively during the press briefing later that same day. When reporters pressed her about whether the president was joking or if there was genuine spiritual motivation behind his peace efforts, her response was crystal clear. "I think the president was serious. I think the president wants to get to heaven, as I hope we all do in this room as well." This official confirmation transforms Trump's comment from a potential throwaway line into a legitimate insight into his decision-making process. It raises fascinating questions about the role of personal faith in international diplomacy. Let's dive deeper into what actually happened during that pivotal meeting with Zelensky and other world leaders that prompted Trump's spiritual reflection. The August gathering at the White House was notably different from Zelensky's previous visit in February, which had been characterized by tension and public criticism from both Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance. This time around, the atmosphere was considerably more diplomatic and productive. Zelensky himself seemed to recognize the importance of this improved dynamic. He arrived wearing a formal black suit, rather than the military clothing that had drawn negative comments during his earlier visit. A strategic wardrobe choice that signaled his commitment to diplomatic rather than purely military solutions. The guest list for the August 18th summit reads like a who's who of European leadership. French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Finnish President Alexander Stubb, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer all participated in the discussions. Trump first met privately with Zelensky in the iconic Oval Office before expanding the conversation to include the broader group of European leaders in the White House East Room. During these discussions, Zelensky made a point of thanking Trump, something Vance had previously criticized him for failing to do during their contentious February encounter. Trump's optimism following these meetings was palpable. He told the assembled leaders they would know in a week or 2 weeks whether a viable peace agreement could be reached, a timeline that suggested he believed real progress was possible. But the most significant development came after the formal meetings concluded. Trump reached out directly to Vladimir Putin, attempting to facilitate a face-to-face meeting between the Russian and Ukrainian presidents. This diplomatic outreach represents exactly the kind of peacemaking effort that Trump believes could help secure his place in heaven. Trump announced this development on his Truth Social platform, writing, "Everyone is very happy about the possibility of peace for Russia-Ukraine. At the conclusion of the meetings, I called President Putin and began the arrangements for a meeting at a location to be determined between President Putin and President Zelensky. After that meeting takes place, we will have a trilat, which would be the 2 presidents plus myself. Again, this was a very good early step for a war that has been going on for almost 4 years. The proposed trilat, a 3-way summit between Trump, Putin, and Zelensky, represents an ambitious diplomatic framework that could potentially break the deadlock that has persisted since Russia's invasion began. However, Trump's approach to these negotiations includes some controversial elements that are worth examining. While he committed to helping guarantee Ukraine's security in any eventual deal, he deliberately avoided specifying exactly what that commitment would entail. Additionally, he seemed to dismiss the need for a ceasefire as a prerequisite for peace negotiations, a position that many conflict resolution experts would find problematic. Despite the apparent European unity displayed during the summit, it remains unclear whether the meetings produced any concrete progress toward ending the conflict. The diplomatic process is still in its early stages, and the gap between Russian and Ukrainian positions remains substantial. Now here's the controversial question that nobody wants to ask. Is it appropriate for a world leader to make foreign policy decisions based on personal religious motivations? On one hand, Trump's desire to save lives and end suffering aligns with virtually every major religious and humanitarian tradition. His acknowledgement that he feels spiritually accountable for his actions could be seen as a positive development. A leader who recognizes that his decisions have moral consequences beyond just political calculations. On the other hand, some might argue that foreign policy should be based on national interests, strategic calculations, and diplomatic expertise rather than personal spiritual concerns. There's also the question of whether Trump's admission about being at the bottom of the totem pole regarding heaven suggests he's making desperate decisions to improve his standing rather than carefully considered policy choices. But here's what's really fascinating, and this might be the most important point of all. Trump has previously stated that he believes he was saved by God to make America great again, following the July 2024 assassination attempt when a bullet grazed his ear. This suggests his spiritual concerns aren't new or superficial, but rather represent a consistent thread in how he views his role and responsibilities as president. This brings us to a broader question that extends far beyond Trump himself. What role should personal faith play in political leadership? Throughout American history, presidents from George Washington to Abraham Lincoln to Jimmy Carter have openly discussed how their religious beliefs influenced their decision-making. Trump's approach is perhaps more direct and unfiltered than most, but it's not entirely unprecedented. The fact that Trump is willing to publicly admit his spiritual concerns, including his worry about his eternal fate, actually demonstrates a level of vulnerability and self-reflection that many people don't associate with his typical public persona. Whether you view this as genuine introspection or calculated political positioning likely depends on your existing opinion of Trump himself. What's undeniable is that this episode reveals something significant about how Trump approaches his presidency and his legacy. He clearly sees his role in ending the Ukraine conflict as more than just another foreign policy objective. He views it as potentially redemptive, both for the people suffering in the war and for his own spiritual standing. So here's my challenge to you. Do you think political leaders should openly discuss how their religious beliefs influence their policy decisions? Is Trump's transparency about his spiritual motivations refreshing honesty, or does it raise concerns about the separation of church and state? And perhaps most controversially, if ending a war really could help someone get to heaven, shouldn't we want our leaders to have that motivation? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Are you inspired by a leader who admits he's worried about his soul and wants to save lives to improve his eternal prospects? Or does this kind of religious motivation in foreign policy make you uncomfortable? Let's have this conversation, because this intersection of faith, politics, and international relations is only going to become more relevant as Trump continues his presidency.